Jared Craig. I'll be your host this evening. We have quite a few special guests for us for what we're calling our Clergy Convocation on the COVID-19 crisis. So I'd like to take some time to introduce everyone that we have with us and welcome them. We have from St. Mark's Church, Father Ed Cardoza. From St. Mary's Church, Father Matt Westcott. From the pastor of the Bethany Congregational Church, Reverend Bruce Greer. We have Reverend Jim Robinson from the Foxboro Universalist Church, and we have Bishop Mark Small, the former bishop of the Foxboro Ward of the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have Reverend Bill Dudley from the South Foxboro Union Church. We have Pastor Eric Wolf from the Lutheran Church of Our Redeemer, and we have Reverend Tom Beauclair from Grace Chapel. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I know in this time of crisis, a lot of people are looking to religion, looking to faith, and for people some sort of guidance. Maybe for some it's politics, but I know for a lot of your congregations, you are that touchstone, that leader, that healer, that faith giver, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. So I'd like to start the conversation by asking you, maybe we can start with Father Ed on this, and what messages of hope, love, peace, compassion is your church preaching, and while you're on that note, how are you getting that message out in these times?
Well, we're in the season of Lent in the Episcopal Church, like so many of my brother Christians. And so that season is a time of not only penitence, but it's also a time of preparing people for the hope of Easter. So we are very much focused on providing the readings and the liturgical patterns of our church. We're streaming our services. We're connecting with people through our online email. But we've also just done something really cool, which is creating compassion circles, which has a circle leader. We broke the entire parish up into geographic groups. And so those individuals are going to be reaching out, connecting with parishioners, providing them with hope, and knowing that they are being seen and being heard. And if there's anything that they need or anything that's going unmet, we'll help them with it.
Great, thanks so much. Father Matt at St. Mary's, again, same question for you. What is your message at this time, and how are you able to get that out?
Well, I'm doing many of the similar things, trying to use modern communication methods and the filming and the posting of worship services for the folks, but also to remind people that, we believe that we are still united. We believe that we're still together as a community in this, though we're physically separated. We're not spiritually separated at all unless we allow it. And in our prayer and in our confidence in the Lord, we don't have to do that. In fact, this is a time to double down on the confidence that we're called to have in the Lord. Great,
thank you. It sounds like maybe a lot of people are doing the same. Pastor Bruce, or Bruce of the Bethany Congregational, are you doing anything different? Anything that you want to add? Maybe what your message is? We'll give everyone a chance to get their message out, and then we can open up to a little more discussion.
No, I want to echo what's been said so far in terms of having to ramp up our contact with each other, providing worship opportunities online, organizing people to make what I've called care calls, and then keeping track of who is being contacted, mindful not only of our older members, but also folks who are in very vulnerable situations medically, and also economically. So in terms of rendering care, we're doing that. In terms of the messages, last Sunday's topic was practicing active patience, seeing this as an opportunity for spiritual discipline and growth, and also acknowledging and remembering all of the folks that we need to be praying for these days. Not just the folks on the front lines of the healthcare community, not just the first responders, but for those who stock our grocery stores and those who provide essential services, vital services to us. My son is a surgeon at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and certainly we're concerned for him. We're concerned for anybody who's out there serving us. And so we're very mindful of that as we remember others in our thoughts and prayers. So we're doing very similar things to others that have been mentioned.
That's great. Thank you. It's nice to hear that message of mindfulness over and over again. Reverend Jim from Foxboro Universalist, what's your church's message and how are you able to get that out?
We're getting it out through Zoom, which is the internet service. So Sunday mornings are done on Zoom. And it also includes a way that congregants can speak to each other on the Sunday morning service. We also have 3 support groups going during the week where about half the congregation can gather in small groups to talk about how they're feeling and what they're doing. Our message is all about love. That's our whole foundation. Love is the spirit of the Universalist tradition. So it's all about loving kindness to yourself, loving kindness to the people around you, loving kindness to the world. So love is bigger than our fear. And if we keep grounding and connecting with each other, with caring for each other and staying in touch with each other in that spirit of love and kindness, we can get through anything together.
Love that message. That's great. Thank you. Bishop Mark from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your church's message and maybe how they're getting out. I know you're the former bishop. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Right. Well, I echo the thoughts and support all the things that I've heard that all these other clergymen are doing in their churches. It's all wonderful support, and we're doing similar things with Zoom and outreach, and a ministering program that's done individually has kind of been a long-standing thing in the church where every family or every head of a family, husband and wife, have certain other members that they stay in contact with to keep communications open for any needs that might arise. One unique thing that's happened in our church began actually about a year ago in January of 2019 when the leadership of the church in Salt Lake wanted to have more of an emphasis on spirituality and spiritual life in the home. And so if I could read something here that I thought it said, worshiping God at church and participating in sacred ordinances there and gathering together to teach one another, strengthen and serve to each other are essential elements of deepening faith and personal conversion. But the home is viewed in our church as the laboratory. And so they're encouraging more home-centered study of the gospel with family members. And during this coronavirus scare, our church has a lay clergy and lay priesthood that any worthy man in the church can hold the priesthood. And we've been authorized to bless the sacrament and pass it to our families within our homes on Sundays.
That's interesting. And if I may follow up, is that a new approach to practicing your religion, or has this always been the case and it's just now being more widely used?
Well, I think as in a lot of other churches, if there have been shut-ins in the past that couldn't get out to services, people who held the priesthood would go to somebody's home and administer the sacrament for them. And in this time where people can't get out and about, the leadership of the church has designated that the priesthood holder in the home could do that service for their own family.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. If I go to Reverend Bill from the South Foxboro Union Church, Reverend Bill, what is your church's message and how are you able to get that out?
I haven't changed my Sunday morning message. I've been doing a series from the Gospel of John and the unique person of Jesus. And if you have a relationship with God, that will get you through any situation. So it's sort of, in my mind, a timeless message for the coronavirus crisis. I divided our church between people who might be over a certain age or medically vulnerable and younger people who would be willing to do shopping or errands or, caring for the other people. And one thing I discovered is that everyone in our church so far is bulletproof. They're all continuing to care for themselves. But my concern is, as this deepens and takes root in Foxboro and all the other surrounding communities, that situation will change dramatically. We've been doing Sunday morning service on Facebook Live. We've gotten a great audience, and we are using Zoom. I've done a couple things on Zoom, and tomorrow night we're going to have, for anybody in the church who wants to visit together, we're going to be getting together on Zoom. So in a way, I think it will bring a lot of churches closer together, actually, in the midst of all this.
I hope you're right. That's great. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on as well to Pastor Eric Wolf from the Lutheran Church of Our Redeemer. Pastor Eric.
One of the things that we're experiencing is, we're pretty geographically spread out already. And it's been challenging for us to find ways to get together outside of Sunday mornings. I think like a lot of congregations probably find with everything going on. And one of the things that we've been able to do is I've seen the way that we communicate begin to bring people a little bit closer in. We canceled services before any of the shelter in place or real social distancing started, because we, like a lot of congregations, have some people that are a little bit older, and they're the ones who are absolutely going to be there no matter what. And I think the thing that I wanted to make certain that our congregation understood is that we weren't canceling worship because we were afraid of what the coronavirus might do. We canceled worship because we love the people who attend our congregation, and it's part of our sacred duty to make certain that we care for them physically, spiritually, emotionally, and sometimes that means loving each other from afar. And so what we've been doing is, rather than doing live just because internet is spotty where we are, we've been recording and then posting to YouTube and inviting people through emails and through our Facebook page and everything else to tune in. And the plan is typically to do that at 9:30. I also have been working on putting together some Zoom opportunities for our congregation, but I'm also a bereavement coordinator with Metro West Hospice over in Marlboro. And so I've also been working on putting together some Zoom conferences that would bring together our bereaved families and families of our patients in some ways that they might be able to connect, because I have a feeling they're feeling very isolated too. It's just, it's a really challenging time to figure out how to be community when community is at the heart of who we are.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you so much for that work that you're doing as well. And last but not least, of course, I want to hear from Reverend Tom Beauclair from Grace Chapel. What is your message and how are you able to get it out?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Michael. You know, one of the things we're going through a series right now called Bless, and the idea, what does it look like for us to bless others and bless each other? And it's been really timely with the virus. We actually took a little time out 2 weeks ago and, made it more about the current situation, but then we jumped right back into the middle of it. And it's been neat. I've been able to be the recipient of people blessing me, whether it's through different prayers or things showing up at my front door or letters or emails or notes of encouragement, which has been great. I think we've all been blessed by Zoom fatigue. What a blessing Zoom has been for us to be able to carry on our meetings. But also, I don't know about you, my eyes get a little weary by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I want to shut it down sometimes. So that's been fun. And so we're doing that. I think it's neat. We have a lot of things going on with our groups already. And so we've got many of our people cared for, and similar to my other colleagues here, we're making sure that those that are either the oldest and also on the periphery are being reached out to through other means and given opportunities to connect. So we're very, very engaged in making sure that happens, and that's a great concern for us. That's great. Thank you, Reverend Tom. One thing I want to sort of open it up to the group for, if we can manage with the technical specs that we have, is for me, religion and coming together as a faith community was always about getting in the same room as people and really being able to share space, even breathe the same air. It feels so important to me to build that sort of communion. And I'm wondering if you're finding that you're still able to do that. What are some of the challenges, but maybe also if you have some of the highlights of being able to have online services, and it looks like we might be doing this for quite a while, how you might try to improve this. If anyone wants to speak, we could give you the floor on that.
I'll speak. Just
Father Matt.
This is my first experience with Zoom, so perhaps I'll take my fellow pastors lead here and start implementing that more. And it is definitely a real challenge. I mean, so much of what we do and what you said, Mike, is correct. We worship as a community, and that generally involves being with each other in physical proximity. And many of us have a sacramental tradition that, by definition, has a physicality to it. And so now we're being asked to avoid those things, or at least change how we conceive of them. It's a real challenge, and it is a real deprivation. I mean, this is not a great, bold new initiative that anyone would embrace. This is at best a workaround. But I can't help but think this can be an extraordinary opportunity to ask our people, in the spirit of a Lenten retreat, to re-examine their connection to Sunday worship, to re-examine their conception of the Eucharist and my tradition of sacramental confession, precisely because it's been removed. And so I think we could actually come out of this stronger and even better catechized over a lot of things, and actually have our communities strengthened. I believe that.
That's a nice silver lining.
May I
Thanks.
speak?
Yeah, sure, Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't know if I heard it in the last round of responses, but I'm sure this is the case for all of us. We're also making an extra effort to reach out to families with youth and children, and keeping in regular contact with them and providing them with support as well as opportunities online relative to their faith formation and support. And I'm sure others of you are doing the same thing. For some reason, I don't know that I heard that come up. So forgive me for going off topic, but I did want to mention.
Sure. Bruce, could I ask, actually, you mentioned something about care calls in your last talk. Could you speak a little bit more about care calls, what those are, and maybe is that something that you're doing specifically, or your congregants?
Well, it's both and. What I really want to do is to have an orchestrated effort on the part of the congregation, overseen by a team of people, so that we are reaching out to everyone and doing what I would call a well-being check, or a phone call, friendly phone call, support. How are you doing? What do you need? How are things going for you? And we're just literally now getting that organized. So I can't say that it's up and running, but we are working to pull that together. But we also want to keep track of who's been contacted, because as is true in all of our congregations, some folks are less known than others. And there are those favorite older folks that everybody knows and loves, and they'll always get calls. But there are some of the other folks that are on the fringes that we want to make sure that we reach out to them as well.
Thanks.
I got something.
Sure, maybe Tom and then Jim.
Sure. I liked what Father Matt was saying a few minutes ago about opportunities. I really feel like this gives us a lot of opportunities to really figure out who we are as a church, and figure out a lot of the things that we get to put our finally, it's a test, if you will, for us to really prove our faith in a lot of ways. And I'm excited about it. Every time I have a Zoom call, one of the first things I like to start off is asking people, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you processing the coronavirus? And just hearing where they're at and allowing them to hear where other people are at. I've had people from a 1 to barely registering to a 20, totally off the charts. And it's really been interesting to see how people process, and to give them the space to do that. Because if they're not in community, they're probably not doing that. And if they're not in community, they're probably not doing that well. And so I feel like that's one of the things that this is giving us the opportunity to delve into community in ways that we haven't before.
And how are you processing, Tom?
Me personally?
Yeah.
What number would I give myself?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. So I usually avoid that question as much as possible. But in all candid, probably about a 5, between a 5 and a 7. I go back and forth in that area. I think, we're always concerned. It's funny, I'm not critical of our government. I think they've done a really good job of pacing this out so as not to cause mass hysteria. I don't know if anyone's thought about that or seen that, but I feel like they've done a good job with not creating panic. And I think as a church, we have a great opportunity to show great kindness and great love to people in places of need. And I hope that we are mobilized in such a way to be able to do that, not just in our congregations, but in our town and in our state as well. So I'm hoping that those opportunities are going to be met well from people in the church.
Thank you. Now I want to get back to Reverend Jim, and then maybe we'll hear from Eric.
So I'll give you some specific examples from our experience of last Sunday at our Sunday morning Zoom service. When we opened it up to people sharing their joys and concerns, we learned which families already had the COVID-19 in their house. They were already dealing with it and what that was like. We learned what members had lost their jobs and had no income coming in at all. We learned of different situations. And because most of the congregation was on the service, they could hear each other, reach out to each other. And so our board is going to be talking about taking money from our reserve and setting up $1,000 gifts to families that have lost jobs that, that they can just ask for it and we'll give it to them. We talked about how to reach out. So that was a very practical example of how community can still happen, even though we weren't in the same room.
That's great. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. And Eric, I believe you had your hand up as well. Did you want to share?
Yeah. And I think that, like the others have said, we're an incarnational faith at our root. And we've spent generations discussing what that really means, in terms of our sacraments, in terms of what it means to worship together. And as we kind of delve into this idea of what it means to gather online, where is the community? And I've seen, various synods throughout the ELCA and among various pastors, ideas about, is it appropriate to do communion or not when people are in their own homes? And I think every answer I've heard every answer there is, I've heard given at some point. And I think one of the things that drives home for me is that as much as we think things have changed, there's something that remains fundamentally the same about our humanity. And that is that we have a deep-seated need for community. And as much as we hear people talk about the church changing, I think that we also are able to recognize that there's something that fundamentally remains the same about the church as well. And that's that in times of struggle, those are the times where we look hardest for the presence of God. And where people are gathered at the foot of the cross, that's where that incarnate sense of God really shows up. So, whether we're gathered by Zoom or whether we're gathered in the same room, I think that community is real. The part that I feel is more challenging is, how to get that connection, especially because, Sunday morning sometimes for some people is the only time during the week they get touched. It's the only time they have a human connection. And I don't know how to replicate that yet. So that's the piece that I guess I struggle with. But I do have a strong sense that y'all are correct, that this is an opportunity for us to live into a moment that God's calling us into and follow the Spirit wherever it leads. I've been praying for a pillar of smoke by day and a pillar of fire by night, right?
I like that. I was listening to NPR this week about the loneliness epidemic in America and how this has been sort of growing over the past few years, maybe even decades, but how it's going to sort of really be highlighted right now. So I thank all of you for doing the best that you can to reach out to individuals and through the group that you're a part of. I do really appreciate that. If anyone else would like to speak on that, I'd be happy to. I also just another topic I'm thinking as a citizen who, as we're talking about isolation, I'm wondering if you folks feel like you're out, paddling a boat by yourselves, or are the higher ups or the hierarchy in your individual religions, are they providing support and ideas for how to keep these rituals and traditions moving forward? Are they able to provide you with WebEx trainings or Zoom trainings as the corporate world might be doing? Are you finding that there are resources available to you as well, or are you out on your own trying to figure this out day to day? If anyone has that, I know, Bill, we haven't heard from you in a while. If you wouldn't mind, and then maybe Bruce, I saw your hand come up. That would be great.
So my church is non-denominational. We're not connected with any denominations. So we're not in any association. So we're sort of on our own, but unless I'm missing something between Facebook Live and Zoom, we've been able to, and the old-fashioned cell phone, which is old-fashioned now, we're able to keep in touch with people. And if I can weave in the last question too, I agree with Father Matt and with Tom and others. I think this is a really great opportunity to, in an innovative way, pray for one another, care for one another, pray for the country, pray for the leadership. I think there's a lot here that is happening that is really, although it's outside the box, it's spiritually enriching.
Interesting take. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Also, I think it was Bruce, where you had your hand up as well, if you'd like to.
I did. Bethany is affiliated with the United Church of Christ, and we're very fortunate. I am ordained in the American Baptist churches, but so I have the advantage of 2 denominations. But we've been very blessed. I feel like I've been hooked up to a fire hose, actually, because I'm getting so much information, spending a lot of time consuming information, and then handing it along to the appropriate people. It could be virtual worship, resources on that. It could be resources on online giving. It could be resources on caregiving, resources for children, a plethora of resources through our denomination, through ecumenical organizations. One group that I've been looking at quite a bit is called Practical Resources for Congregations, which is a multi-denominational organization on Long Island. And they're producing some fabulous, they've been doing it for a while, webinars anyway, but there is a plethora of information out there for congregations, and we've been taking full advantage of it.
And I assume you're making that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And that also includes how to care for your building and very practical issues in terms of sanitizing your building and CDC standards and other such things. So it covers the full gamut of resources for congregations at a time like this. So we've been very fortunate to have lots of resources available to us.
Thanks. I'm meant to say, I'm assuming you're making those available to your congregants too, as I'm sure everyone here is, because that seems to be your main job as faith leaders. So I would encourage people to reach out to you on behalf of you, if that's okay, to everyone involved. Is there anyone else who'd like to talk about anyone that they're in touch with? Yeah, maybe Tom and then Mark.
Mark, I think you were up first. Mark, I'll defer to you. How's that? You've had your hand up longer.
Mark and then Tom.
Thank you very much. You know, I think it's ironic that in the age of social media, people have been talking about the distancing we've felt just because people have preferred to communicate through cell phones or through Facebook or whatever. But this very technology that I acknowledge the Lord's hand in it coming forth is really uniting us now during this time of crisis when we're physically discouraged from gathering together in the ways that we normally would. So I think we can learn a lot about reaching out in a sincere way through the tools that we've been given in technology to uplift one another and to stay attentive to each other's needs and to show the charity, the true love of Christ towards all.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I like how you said that too, because being discouraged from being together, that phrase had such a negative, I had a negative knee-jerk reaction to that, but I'm thinking of it the way, I think it was Pastor Eric said, that it's a way we care for each other by not getting together. It's actually a way that we're showing we want to take care of you. We're not afraid of this, but we want to, care for each other by having some distance. So I'm trying to reinterpret that phrase for myself too. Tom, would you like to speak to that? Who you're in touch with, how you're in touch with them?
Yeah. No, it's amazing that social distancing phrase is not necessarily the best way to talk about this, because we don't want distance. We want to be with each other. So
absolutely.
I think we're all right. I think social responsibility somehow fits in there, but that even might have some issues. Now, I get the benefit of being a part of a larger church. Grace Chapel is really 5 campuses in Massachusetts. Most of them are up in Lexington, Wilmington, East Lexington, Watertown, or other 4 campuses. So we collaborate on a lot of things, and it's been great because resource-wise, we were able to collaborate on getting the appropriate things to our families who are now locked in their homes, if you will, with captive audiences with children and different resources, whether they're videos or other things. So it's been a blessing for us to have each other to work with, and also to bounce ideas off of, and try to be a little bit centralized in our approach, if you will, to are we doing the right things? And it's been great not to have to make a lot of those choices in a vacuum for me, to be able to have other people to work with, and just be praying together, to be doing the right things, and creating clarity in our messaging. I think is also hard. Sometimes we're so active in wanting to get a message out there that it's maybe not the clearest or the succinctest in the world, or concise. And so that's been something that we've been trying to drive at in the last couple of days. And then finally, I feel like we've gone through the last week and a half, it's kind of like that airplane scenario with the oxygen masks come down. We've got ours on, and we don't need to put two on. We can only have one mouth, so we're good. We only need to put one on. We don't need two. How do we move forward with now helping others get their mask on? And what does that look like? And so we're trying to move in that direction and be for others as much as possible.
Yeah, I also feel like a lot of you, the group of you, have the role of flight attendant in this strange scenario where a lot of people, myself included, are probably looking to you to see how you're reacting to this. And if you're calm, I'm calm. If you're nervous, I'm nervous. So I appreciate the difficult public position you must be in. And talking about your churches at large, or even Bill, certainly in your case, your individual church, has this been cause for lost jobs, or are parishioners losing their jobs? How are you helping them in dealing with that? I know we heard Reverend Jim at the UU church saying that they're able to help people directly. Is anyone else like to take this opportunity to let people know how they can help? Also, if they need help, how they can get it? Yes, if you'd like to put your hand up and talk to that, I could call on you. Sure, Pastor Eric, I saw you first.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm realizing is, it's kind of like a flood. The trouble is that right now what we're seeing is the initial wave that comes from the disease. But the trouble is that we don't really understand how this is going to affect people until we get a little ways down the road. The trouble that we have right now in our culture, just because of the generational debt and all the stagnant wages over, versus cost of living increases. We have so many people who live check to check. We have so many people who are just a check or two or three away from, complete life upheaval. We have so many families who are dependent on the services. Like when we let school out, the children who would otherwise get a free or reduced lunch, or just the consistency of that schedule. So I think the first thing I'm trying to bear in mind is that this is a marathon, and this is the opportunity for the church to be the church has yet to really present itself in fullness. But we draw from a rich tradition of church over the last 2,000 years, where in the places where there is suffering and struggling, in the places where families are broken and lives are turned over, we start hospitals, we start schools, and we start neighborhood centers. And, we heed that call to be community in those hard spaces. I think that's where identity as the church really comes into play. Right now, we're just kind of playing and trying to keep everybody from freaking out. But I've got that long view that there's going to be a time for us to put our gloves on and go to work for a long time. So right now, all we're doing is we're just kind of checking in with people and making sure there's not immediate needs.
Thank you for doing that. And I think a point you're making too is that with the income disparity, the way it seems to have been growing, at least in my adult life that I'm aware of, I know people are suffering and need help now, but if anything, maybe this will help highlight that and make it a more immediate problem. Sure. Reverend Jim, I see your hand. And then if anyone else wants to talk about this too, we'll get them in. Reverend Jim? Father Ed?
I really appreciate the mentioning this is going to be a long term with the economy and with our families and individuals who are paycheck to paycheck. And so that's why I'm pushing our board to make some money available to families immediately, even if it's coming out of our reserve. And then my next step would be, if it's going on long, to ask those members of the church who are financially independent, stable, this is a time to contribute to help the other families in the church. There is this income inequality, It's in our church, it's in every community. This is the time we need to step up and share our wealth with those who need to get by until at the end of this. So I think the church needs to play the role also of making sure that those on the margins are pulled along by everybody who has the resources to do it.
Thank you for that. And Father Ed, I believe you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, so again, I think this is a really important issue for all of us. I think for the church, one of the things we became aware of, people wanted to cancel palm orders, they wanted to cancel the Easter flowers, they wanted to cut the musicians. And the reality is a lot of those folks are rural farmers. The people who take care of our Easter flowers are right here in town. So the first choice for the church was to support those orders, whether or not we're going to use them or not. We're going to take those flowers, whether they go to the altar of God or they go into people's homes for Easter. That's what we're going to do. So we had to make some decisions around that, keeping good on our own promises. We've also started a really fun thing at St. Mark's. We had our music director reach out to musicians who have lost their gigs and lost their jobs. And we've got a gift of a gig. We are continuing worship. So because we have a large sanctuary, we can distance people far away, and we bring in a guest musician every weekend, give them a gift of a gig. And that's been really well received, not only by the artist community, but also a lot of parishioners have stepped up there. And then we, like Reverend Jim, also have funding available. We have a gift called the Life Building Fund, which is created to help folks in these moments. And we've advertised that. We had $13,000 raised by our parishioners in under 7 days for that fund. So as always, one of the things about doing a parish census right now is one of the vulnerable markers are people who are stretched, who live paycheck to paycheck. We've already seen a number of them lose their jobs. And so we are actually already there. We are giving out checks. We are helping people with food. We're helping people with making the bills. Some of them are not getting a paycheck this week and have already made contact. So we are living in an Acts moment in the life of the church, and we need to step forward and take of our abundance and bring it to the people of God.
I like that, idea of taking up your abundance too, and really, if there are rainy day funds, this is the rainy day, right? Hopefully, I'm not even going to jinx it by saying what I was going to say. Is there anyone else that wants to talk about what their churches are doing, or highlight that, or maybe we can post some information online too, in order for people to get in touch if they need help or would like to help. I'm sure you're reaching out. And so as you're talking about helping people, I was also wondering if there are any rituals or traditions, especially in this Lenten time. I know for those of you that celebrate Lent, that seems to be such a particularly special time for those religions. How are you able to, create some type of ritual or some type of ceremony around this time from afar in a way that maybe you haven't already? Maybe we've already talked about this, so if there's nothing to add, we can certainly move on. Anyone? Sure, Mark. Yep.
Personally, on a personal note, I'm wondering what the Lord wants us to learn through this whole experience that we're going through as a global community. And so I'm looking for the Lord's hand in the blessings. He's always there for us. And even when the times are hard and there are trials, this might make us reach more for his hand and his guidance. And I'm hoping that we might see more of a spirit of goodwill among everybody in the nation, whether they're members of our congregation or not, and across the world, as the family of man, all the children of God.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I think this is an opportunity for people who can step up to step up, right? Great. Anything else? Sure, Pastor Eric.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is we're in a culture that really values action. I grew up in construction. Dad built houses, and so like our life is fixing things and building things, and so I have within me, and this is why I mentioned the marathon. I have within me this desire to hurry up and do something, but I also think that one of the things that I'd like to encourage people to consider, and it was your comment about Lent that brought this up, is there's real value right now in hurrying up and doing nothing. What reserves people have, they still have. And even though right now it's challenging, the challenge is going to come down the road. And so you have to, we really have to measure how much do we spend immediately, and how do we gauge that so that we have something for the long term. The other piece of that is the image from Scripture that jumped into my mind was the image of Jesus hearing that Lazarus was ill. He didn't jump out and say, "Congratulations, Mary, Martha, I'm about to go raise him from the dead." He took 3 days and prepared. And then he went and he met them on the road and assured Martha that the sun was still in the sky, and wept with Mary because he took their grief seriously. And we dwell in this moment prior to the resurrection, where we're still in the grief and the pain of the knowledge that Lazarus stinketh in the tomb. And that's a holy space where we dwell. And that's one of the things that I'm encouraging our congregation to contemplate is, what do we do in this space where everything's awkward and all of us are feeling inadequate and all of us are feeling helpless, knowing that here we are in the valley of the shadow of death, but the Lord is with us.
Great. And so what are we able to do as congregants? I know, giving money and helping out people who need it is such an obvious answer. Is there anything else we can do in our own homes? Bruce, I saw your hand. Feel free to answer that question.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what Pastor Eric was talking about. I had the incredible privilege of serving at Ground Zero in New York City 4 days after 9/11 with a team from the Boston Fire Department and Providence Fire Department as a chaplain. And also, I was a pastor in Rhode Island at the time of the nightclub fire, and was the chaplain to the Warwick, Rhode Island Fire Department and on the state critical incident stress management team at the time, and was at the fire site all night long. And if I've learned anything, and I've also been a hospital chaplain, if I've learned anything from these experiences, I've learned of the power of presence. And even in teaching students in a clinical pastoral education setting, who would go and visit a patient and then they would claim, well, nothing happened. Well, of course something happened. You showed up and you were present to them. And so I really like what Eric had to say, and that is sometimes it's best not to say anything. It's just good to be present to one another, check in with one another. Simple questions like, how are you doing? I loved what Pastor Tom said relative to where are you on the scale? How are you doing? And just be present to people. There's a powerful ministry in just simply being present to people and not distracted, not, just fully present to them in their moment and then going wherever they go with it. And so, amen, yes. And one other insight, I know some of us read leadership literature that talks about a non-anxious presence. It's impossible not to be anxious. That's a human condition, but it is possible. And I want to reflect on the importance of being calm. And that is that if you're calmer, then everybody else will be calmer as well. And so there's a real gift that leadership can bring into any of these situations in terms of being not a non-anxious presence, but a less anxious presence, and just to be available to people. And I agree with Eric, what he said. I mean, we just can't fix it. This is not a fix-it situation, and the people who are trying to fix it are going to need months and even years to fix it. So right now, it's a matter of persistent patience and active presence with each other. I think that's the key.
Yeah, and sorry, I know I was supposed to raise my hand, but holy cow. The other thing that we can do in the church that I think is challenging in our culture is that our culture is awkward about those hard spots because we have so distanced ourselves from our humanity. I'm not like scolding the youth obsessed culture or whatever, but part of the reason we're youth obsessed is we're afraid of our own mortality because we don't have a good way in our culture to deal with that. And so one of the things the church is able to offer is that ability to stand there with people and be present with them. That is the incarnate presence of God right there. There's nothing more holy than saying, I have no clue what to say, but I'm here with you.
Thanks. Yeah, I know there are entire books, poems, plays written about even just the fact of just acknowledging presence. So that feels extremely important in these times of isolation as well, from my end. Reverend Jim, I saw your hand go up, and then Father Ed, we could do that.
So I encourage all the people watching this program to make the commitment to reach out to those people in your lives, your friends, your family, your other members in your church. Make it a practice of reaching out and connecting and doing just what the last three speakers have said. How are you? I'm thinking of you. I care. It matters. You matter. As long as we stay in touch with each other, make that effort, make it a regular part of our daily life, and we do it with loving kindness, we will come out of this all right in the end.
Thank you. Yeah, Father Ed.
Before I was a priest, I worked at Partners in Health and spent a lot of time in triaging sort of systems and resources from the earthquake in Haiti to cholera, all the way through, the AIDS pandemic. And one of the things you realize very quickly when you do that work is that there are immediate needs, there are middle needs, and there are really long-term needs. So we're really trying to use that as a basis, neither to sort of wear ourselves down in what is going to be a marathon, nor to take on competencies that may not be our competencies, and other folks can do much better than us. But there are very small ways that we can be church. So even something as simple as realizing people need toilet paper. So we've kind of started this thing called the Little Pantry on South Street. You can pull in right in front of St. Mark's 24/7. There's a teeny little house there. It's stocked with toilet paper and pasta sauce and spaghetti. What's been really powerful is that's been announced to the community. What's happening? People are taking toilet paper and they're giving toilet paper. And that's a really powerful sign and symbol that we're going to be okay and that we're in this all together. And there are very small things that we can do. And what's been intriguing to me is for some folks, this is going to be the first time when they're without toilet paper and they may not know where to go or who to ask. So the fact that they can show up at 2 a.m. right outside of St. Mark's and grab some toilet paper might be a really good lesson for them. And so that's what we're starting to see there. And it's been really powerful to see something like that. Simple, concrete, accessible to all the community, moving past the church. And even though we have a ministry of folks who are supposed to stock that every day, we haven't had to stock that once in the last 10 days that's been up and running in this community. That's a powerful sign that we are indeed all in this together.
And kudos and thank you to everyone who's been contributing to that. That's excellent. I do have to say I spoke with Town Manager Keegan last week and Deputy Chief Kenmans, and they were talking about how important mental health is. And so even just Deputy Chief Kenmans even said just taking a couple of deep centering breaths and relaxing and trying to quell the anxiety and recenter is so important. We have just a few minutes left. I wanted to give everyone a chance to maybe share a few last thoughts and maybe try to give a message of hope and faith to the community at large that's listening, and maybe even your specific congregants if you feel necessary. But thank you for reminding us of the things that we can do as people of faith or not that are helpful. So if I can just go down the line and ask for your closing thoughts and maybe a few good ideas for active mindfulness, if you have them, would be great. So I'd like to start sorry for Father Ed, you're getting a lot of screen time here, but I'm just going to go down the line, start with you, Father Ed, at St. Mark's.
Sure, I'll just say this. I think it's really important to touch base with yourself, take your own temperature, as Tom was saying. Second, make sure you touch base with others, those in your household and those in your neighborhood, and get their temperature and give them support and love. And then the third is this is an opportunity to touch in with God. It's time to go deep with God and to begin to reflect upon your relationship with God and what God is calling us into in this time, which I believe is love and is service and is being merciful and just to all. And that does begin with yourself, move to the other, and then move to God again.
Thank you so much. Father Matt at St. Mary's.
I would just remind folks to stay calm, to pray, and to realize that the unity we have with the Lord and each other through our baptism is still as real as ever. And there's all the world of difference between being alone and being isolated. Let this alone time contribute to your own sanctification in your prayer life.
Thank you. Yep. Bruce Greer at Bethany Congregational.
One word, two words come to mind, actually. One is pace. And I think the image of a marathon run is a good one. And that is that I think we have to pace ourselves through this and be kind to ourselves and kind to others. And the second word that comes to mind is grace. So not only pacing ourselves, but gracing ourselves, being kind to ourselves, being kind to others, being patient with others, and creating space for yourself and space for the people you know and love. Be a good neighbor, and be mindful of others around you. And last of all, I might say one of the things that I learned that we were taught when I worked at Ground Zero is that they were very strict with us about limiting our exposure to painful stories, to difficult stories. Limit the amount of time you spend watching television relative to the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, it's important to take in good information. My wife and I have been listening to the governor here in Rhode Island every day at 1 o'clock. It's important to get good information and make sure you have good information. It's important to have the news and be up to date, but limit that input because that can be that can add to your stress actually. And ditto to everything else relative to minding and caring for spirituality as we pass through this. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Reverend Jim.
I've been struck the last week with people being to each other, whether it's seeing neighbors on the street, on the Zoom meetings, every place. I feel this urge in most people to want to be kind, to want to do the right thing. And I think that's our saving grace here. That's the presence of the divine right there. So let's be kind to each other. Let's reach out to each other. Let's be kind to ourselves. And it'll be a marathon, but we'll get through it. Let's know we're going to get through it with kindness and love.
Great. Thank you. And Bishop Mark.
Well, I take heart, as a lot of people do, from the words of the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy. He says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." I think there's a lot there for us to think about, the resources that we have within ourselves, as well as the Lord's guidance, to not fear and to know that God is God and will always be with us.
Excellent. Thank you. Reverend Bill.
This is a very interesting phenomenon. And I think, like my friend Mark referred to earlier, I've been trying to look at this, the big picture. If there's a God, what is he trying to say to America and to all the other nations, something like 150 nations? And it feels to me like he's saying, stop what you've been doing and take some time to reflect and refocus on the things that are important, which aren't material things, which are temporary and pass away, but they're that, like we've all been talking about, your relationship with God, your faith. Where are you in your relationship with God? What really matters in life? And I was struck by Psalm 91, which says, "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." And for that faith of dwelling in the shadow of the Almighty, further down, it gives some of the results of trusting in God, which is, you will not fear the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. So I think my message is certainly what all of you have been saying. Love one another, care for the people around you, care for your family, reach out to the people who are vulnerable. The generosity that my friend Father Ed referred to with the toilet paper and people sharing, I've seen that too. But also take time to stop and reflect about what's truly important and what your faith means and what your relationship with God is, because that ultimately is the thing that we take out of this world into the world to come.
Thank you. And Pastor Eric.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to remember is we do look for reasons in the midst of this, because we're people who need to assign meaning to things. We process symbolically, and so when we look for a meaning, I like what's been said about how to process the fact of suffering, because I haven't heard anybody say it's God's fault. I've heard people say that God is with us. I think that's an important distinction. When we read something like Romans 5, we boast in our suffering because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the gift of the Holy Spirit. The presence of God that transforms us is that identity and compassion that God has always had for those who are weak. And the deepest part of our faith is the way that we are called to the foot of the cross to identify with those who are weak and to make our home with them. And I think that's the thing sometimes we lose, because I think we have a habit of wanting to always be happy, and we see faith through joy. But this is maybe a James moment where show me your faith through your works, because faith without works is dead. As a Lutheran, that's a really weird thing for me to say, I think. But I'm weird. I think the other thing is this is an opportunity to be with our families in ways we haven't been in a long time. And so 2 tools. One is from Dr. Rich Melheim. It's called the Faith 5. Share highs and lows. Read a short passage of scripture. Talk about that passage of scripture in relationship to your highs and lows. Pray for each other. And then somehow bless each other. Do this around your table at night. Do this with your spouse. Do this with your kids. Do this over the phone with your parents. It's an opportunity for us to get to know each other in some real ways and build those relationships that might be in our families of origin, but provide us that opportunity for sacredness. And the other one is the importance of breathing. We've talked about mindfulness. My favorite thing is a in for, out for in the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, just as a way of identifying ourselves as people in need of the grace and presence of God. So, I'm a pastor. What can I say? Never use 5 words when 50 will do. So there.
That's great. Thank you. Reverend Tom.
Well, how am I supposed to follow up on 7 really great sermons? Come on, guys. That was fantastic. I love that I feel like we're all on the same page. And, just the way that, we obviously want to be connecting with our Heavenly Father. We want to be connecting with ourselves and making sure we're healthy. And we want to be connecting with others. It's so important. I think for me, it's 2 things. One, Jesus always raised the level of human dignity with every interaction he had. And so how do we do that well? What does that look like for each one of us? I'm looking forward to figuring out what God's trying to do through this whole thing as much as anyone else. I think we're too early to tell, but he's obviously drawing us together, and he's obviously calling us to be more a part of each other's lives in some unique ways. And so I think we do that through simply loving each other well. But also, I think our job as clergy is how do we offer hope and give hope in a way that connects with people individually and corporately? And then how do we offer prayer and letting them know that while these circumstances are bigger than we are, they're not bigger than our Heavenly Father. And I think that's always important to remember.
Thanks so much. That was beautiful, all of you. I really appreciate you sharing those thoughts with our community. And I know our community looks to you as representatives of a higher power, whatever that means to each individual person, but that you are sort of the lightning rods for those that being in this town. And we thank you for sharing today. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. I hope that people who are struggling are able to find some comfort from this conversation, and that I encourage people to reach out to these individuals and their churches and their congregations who it seems are ready and willing to help out in these difficult times. I also, on a personal note, want to thank the board of directors of the Foxboro Cable Access Channel for inspiring this conversation. It came from a discussion amongst the board of directors, and a special thanks, of course, to Paul Beck and Mike Weber for making today happen.